Okay. Good morning, everybody. We are today's daf is 103. We begin towards the bottom of 102b. Um, let's see, about 10 lines up. So we're continuing to discuss issues about renting land, landlords and tenants or leasers. They asked Rav Yana. Socher Amar Nasati. The renter says, I paid you the rent for the land. Umaskir Amar Lo Natalti. The renter, I mean the owner says, I never got the money. Almi Lahavi Raya. Who has to bring the money? Amos. So what's the question about? When does he make this claim? The renter. Ibito, I shouldn't say renter because that could be both. The okay, we'll call him the renter and the owner. Um, if it's like within the term of the rental, right, before the end of the term. So Tanina, we have a price about that. And they wouldn't have and that's like the rent in the typical deal, according to the Gemara, is due at the end of the term, right? So if he says, I paid you already, then we already have the ruling that he wouldn't be believed because the rent is payable later. Ilach and if it's after the year, so we have that too. It's not. We have a Mishnah Mesa B'Tel Shloshim Yom. If the person gives person becomes a father, and the father dies within the first 30 days of the birth. So what's the question is about? It's the firstborn, and is there pidyon ben required? So b'chazka shelo nifta. We assume that since it hasn't been 30 days yet, and when does Pidyon Ben take place after on day 30? So we haven't reached the term yet, the end of the term, and the analogy is to the rental. You haven't reached the end of the rental yet. Then we assume Ad Shiyaviraya Shanifta. Like you have to assume that the redemption did not take place unless there's a proof that it did take place early. Lachar Shloshim Yom, but if the father dies after 30 days, so then we assume we assume that before he died on day 30, he did the pidyon. Achiyomru lo shelo nifta until people say and people tell him that it didn't happen, right? So we see from this that if there's a payment due at the end of a certain time period, then we assume it didn't take place early, and we assume it took place on time. So what's the question about here with the guy who says he paid and the owner says he didn't pay it? We would say the same thing, right? If it's before the end of the term, we assume the payment did not take place, and if it's after the end of the term, we assume it did. And the other person has to bring proof. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a problem. Biyoma de Mishalim Mishneh. We're talking about on the day that the term is up, right? Does the person pay the rent like at the time like on that day? Although so we're not talking about earlier than the day that it's due or after. We're talking about the actual due date. So the question is, who do we believe? Rabbi Yochanan says Tanisua. We have an answer for that. Also, we have a brisa for that. Sachir bismana. If somebody is hired to do a job and he claims his wages on time and the employer says he didn't pay it, nishba v'notel. So the worker is the one who makes the shvua, and then he can demand his pay. So sachir who derama rabban shvuale. It's the case of the sachir, the hired worker, that he has to take a shvua mishum devalvayis tard b'polav, because like we're we're thinking that the employer, he's got a lot of employees to pay. He's a busy guy. He may have made a mistake, right? He thinks he's claiming that he paid, but maybe he was paying somebody else. Maybe he didn't pay this actual guy. And therefore the worker has to take a shvua. Aval hacha socher mehaven b'shvua. But here the renter he can take a shvua and he should be believed. So, so since he can, one second. So right. So in the earlier in the case of the Sachir, why do we not give the shvua to the balabais to the employer? Because he might be making a mistake, right? Like we understand he's a busy guy. He's paid a lot of people on payday. So let's not have him take a shvua because he might really believe that he paid this guy, but he might be mistaken. So he might take a false shvua by mistake, right? So therefore we give the shvua to the other guy. But in the case of the renter, there's no reason to believe, that one is that the one is too distracted or has too much going on, and therefore we leave the shvua with the renter. Rava says, "I'm on Doger
But
lebesel
this man
lechavrecha."
isn't finished, right? This is the day that the
The day
payment is
of,
due.
right, the due
So
date.
doesn't he have until midnight, let's say, or till the next morning, whatever time it is, he's got the whole
Yeah,
24.
yeah. So we're not talking about whether he's late. We're talking about, look, one guy claims it's the due date and I paid you, and the other guy says it's the due date and you didn't pay me yet. Right? So we can't say, oh, nobody would pay today because it's too early or too late. No, this is the date on which you would pay. So that's why we have a suffix. So if it's before the due date, we assume that it wasn't paid. And if it's after the due date, we assume it was paid. What do we assume on the due date? That's where we have a suffix, right? That's where we don't know who to believe.
But he still has a certain time. Then maybe say the payment's due at 5 o'clock or it's due at 8 o'clock, whatever it is, or by midnight. So where's I'm not sure what the machloket is. If he hasn't paid, if it's 8 o'clock in the morning and he hasn't paid, he says, "Listen, I've got till 5 in the afternoon to pay. What are you bothering me for?"
Right. But on the other hand, we could think that like yes, that's what he's saying. He's saying that I didn't pay yet. But the other guy is saying, no, one second. Well, who's saying what? One is claiming it's too early in the day, but the other claiming, but today is the due date. Right. So it's not a question of what time should you pay me. It's a question of, is there a factor that would allow us to assume that one or the other is not being honest, right? So on the due date, you don't have that factor. Like on one hand, you could say, oh, he still has time to pay. On the other hand, you could say, but it's already the due date, so maybe he did pay, right?
Uh,
That's why there's a suffix,
Maybe he did pay, maybe he didn't pay.
right? On the due date, you can say there's a factor to consider that says, yeah, it's the due date he paid, or you could say the due date isn't over and he didn't pay. But there's two competing reasonable claims there, which is not the case before the due date.
Right. No, I
There's
understand
no
before and
competing claim, and
after. Yeah.
after the due date, there's no competing claim.
Right. That's clear enough. But it just seems even on the day itself, what,
Yeah, but which one? Who are you going to like? Why would you say? Why would you give more weight to the idea that, oh, he's still got time? Like it's not like I'm wondering did he pay or not. One guy claims I paid, and the other guy claims you didn't pay, and each one has a reasonable
Mhm.
assumption to go by, right? Either no, I didn't pay because I have more time, or yes, you did pay because it's already the due date.
Yeah.
Okay.
So okay. All right.
Rava says, "Hi, Mandiogali Beisel Lechavri B'Lasser Shnim." Person who rents a house for 10 years, R'chas v'lei Shara, and he has a document, right? There's a rental document. Barmalei Nikitas Chamesh Shnim. And then now there's no date on the document, right? So he comes and says, you know, this document is you're 5 years into the term of this document. Okay, Mehaman he's believed. So Amalei Racha Midiftil Ravinos or Racha says El Me'ativ, that's true. Osfe Mea Zuze Bishar. What about you take the same case with a loan, right, of money, right? I lend you $100. Amalei Paraticha Palga, and the borrower says, I already paid you half. Do we believe that? No, we don't believe that. If there's a star, right? The star says $100 is $100. Amalei, so Ravina says, Achiyashta, can you say the same case? Can you compare the cases? Hasam shtar leguvainachai. Why is there a loan document in the first place? For collection, right? Because I need to prove that you owe me $100. Imisa the pare, if you actually had paid me back half, ibayle lemichtav agme. It has to be. You should have demanded that it be written somewhere, right? Like nobody's going to give. If there's an IOU for $100 and I pay back 50, I'm going to want a receipt, right? Otherwise, the documentary evidence is that there's still $100 owing, right? So if he doesn't have that, then we don't believe him. Iname or michtavale tavra, or you could, receipt, or either write it into the original document or write a receipt, right? Avalacha, but in the case of the land being rented, Amarle, hi, he says, you know why we have a document? Um, it's not the purpose of the document is not just for payment, right? It's not for payment. So that like I have proof, like if you occupy my land for 10 years, you could turn around and say, this is my land. And look, I can prove I've been occupying it for 10 years. That's the chazaka. So therefore I have a document saying, no, the fact that you're there for 10 years is because I rented it to you. Okay, but if you were, so therefore maybe that's why I didn't bother putting in the date, right? Because it's not that I feel like I need to prove when you have to give it back to me, which I mean, you'd think that you would be thinking about that too. But there's another factor. I could say the reason that I wrote this document is so that you won't turn around and say I have a chazaka on the land. So we leave that open. Or well, no, Rava says that we believe the owner about when the term started. Amar Nachman.
But there's no
Shol
date on
Adam,
it, right? You're saying there's no.
no date,
So,
no date on the document.
so how
Pretty
do we
stupid,
know?
right?
Yeah, I mean, how do we know when it actually started? I mean, the person
Exactly.
can say,
So,
listen, no, you
so
rented it to me 2 days ago.
exactly, which is so it's foolish on the part of both parties, right? To enter into such a document. The truth is, you didn't need the document at all, right? You could have done it without a document, which also would have been foolish, right? Like who does that, right? But people do all kinds of things. Um, Listen, in business, you have that all the time. You learn the hard way, right? You don't specify everything. You feel like a contract is going to be too detailed, and it shows you don't trust the other guy, and blah blah blah. And then, of course, what happens is you get into a dispute later on, and you should have had it in the contract. People do that all the time.
Yeah,
Rav Nachman.
isn't that true?
Rav Nachman says, "Shel adam betuvo liolam." If so, here we're going to get into discussing the terms of the agreement, of the borrowing agreement. So I borrow your shovel, right? And I said I want to borrow your shovel in good condition, right? As long as it's in good condition, right? So if I do that, then I can continue to borrow it at any time as long as it's in good condition. So not that I necessarily keep it, but you keep your shovel in your garage, and I say, "Can I borrow your shovel, your working shovel?" Um, and then I use your shovel, I put it back in your garage, and next week I need it again. So it's like the term, as long as the shovel's still in good shape, I haven't ruined your shovel, I can continue to borrow it without asking you again. Amar of Mari Bereder of Shmuel, and Rav Mari says, "Who declining me there? That's only if there's some kind of a kinyan." Um, Amar of Mari Derabashi, Rav Mari said, also said, Mahadrele Kate. What happens if the shovel breaks? So now it's not in good shape anymore. The loan, now I'm not responsible if it was, if it broke in the course of normal use, right? That's the only out for the shovel. But I do have to give you back the handle. So the blade of the shovel is broken, but I have to give you back the handle because now it's no longer in good condition, right? So the terms of the rental are of the borrowing. I'm sorry, the terms of the borrowing are as long as it's in good condition, I can borrow it. Well, guess what? Now it's not in good condition anymore. I have to give back to you. Okay, the shovel was broken, but I have to give back to you the handle. Okay, I can't borrow that anymore.
But is he
I'm all right.
chayav on repair?
I'm sorry.
Is he chayav to repair it?
Is the chayev to what?
To repair the
Oh,
shovel
to
that he
repair
broke.
it. No, so if so the shovel is off the hook if it's mesa machmas malacha, right? If it gets broken in the course of normal use, then that's what the shul is off the hook for, right?
Mhm.
So he's not responsible for the shovel because I mean, look, if he was negligent, it's a different story. But presumably, we're talking about where he wasn't negligent. It just the shovel wore out in the course of normal use. So it's no longer he can't borrow the handle anymore. He has to give back the handle because the terms of the rental have now not rental. The terms of the borrowing have now don't exist anymore. Amarava, Hamanda Amar Lechavre. Person says to his friend, Oshlan Mora Lamirpak Bay Hai Pardesa. Lend me a hoe or what, some kind of tool to dig up this garden, right? Rafik Behu Pardesa. So you can dig up that garden with the hoe. Pardesa, but if he just says a garden, doesn't specify a specific garden. Hang on, let me put this over here. If he says I'm borrowing to dig up a garden, Rafik Bay, call Pardesa Dubai, then you can use it for any garden, right? Um, Pardese. And if he says, let me borrow the hoe to dig up gardens, right? Like my gardens, Rafik Azil Kol Pardesi Diesel. Then you can use it on all of your own gardens. But in all those cases, if it breaks, like we said before, you have to give back the handle. So, in other words, once it's not fit for using for digging up gardens anymore, then you're not responsible because it wore out in the course of normal use. But the terms of the borrowing are now gone, and you have to give back the handle. Amar Papa, Haimon Diamar Lachavre, Oshlan Hai Gargusa. Lend me this well, Vinafla, and the well collapses. Lo Banila. You the borrower can't rebuild the well. In other words, he can't continue to borrow the well. He can't fix it and continue to use it because the lender can say, I didn't lend it to you to rebuild. I lent it to you to use. Gargusa, but if he doesn't say this well, he says, lend me a well, Vinafla, and that well collapsed. Then he can rebuild it. Uh, uh, because the borrower can say, this isn't the same well as before, but you said you would lend me a well, right? So here's a well. I've rebuilt it. It's your well, and I'm borrowing this one because I said I'm borrowing some well, not a specific well. So now that I've rebuilt this one, it may be a different well, but it's still under the terms of the original agreement. Begargusa, if he says, lend me a place to dig a well. In other words, you've got a field. I know there's water under there somewhere. Lend me a place on your field to dig a well, but it doesn't specify which place. Kari v'azil kama garguse bare. You can keep digging until you find water, right? Adam isramile until you find water. But there has to be a kinyan at least in the first place. Uh, to acquire that right of borrowing land until you find a well. I'm not sure why the Gemara makes that conclusion. Certainly, Rashi says, Rashi says that if there's no kinyan, then it doesn't count, right? Then the verbal terms only allow you to dig the first thing, but Rashi doesn't elaborate why, and I don't really know.
Dibura
So
ba'alma, he says.
homework.
When
Yeah,
it's just words.
right. But why does it work for the first place that you dig? Rashi implies that the first place that you dig that's covered by the verbal terms of the loan. But it's not that you can keep digging until you find water, unless there's a canyon in the first place. But it doesn't explain why that is. Like, why is it good enough for the first place you dig and not for further places?
Keeps digging. Well, what does
Yeah.
Rashi mean? Amalei umatzi in the Mahader. What is, I don't.
Dibur Amalei is like it's just verbal. Umatzi Mahaderbe, and the lender can change his mind. He can go back on the terms. So I'm not sure why he's allowed to change his mind. Um, but on subsequent diggings, but not on the first one. So don't know. I'll have to leave that an open question.
They're
Last
talking about
Mishnah
water
B'Perek.
here, and I'm thinking in my mind, what if it's oil? And this guy, this borrower finds oil. Does he benefit
Yeah.
from the oil he finds? I mean, he could be
Good
worth a
question.
fortune.
Good question. Huh. So you borrow the land to dig a well. Did you specify it was a well for water? Maybe you meant an oil well. Yeah. I don't know. Good question. I would say probably that's actually the case. It's probably if you find oil, it's more valuable than maybe that doesn't come under the. I would guess that that doesn't come under the terms of the agreement, but Gemara doesn't address that case. So your guess is as good as mine. You rent a house to somebody, and the house falls down. So you offered you're renting a house. You have to give them another house, right? Hayakatan. If the original house was small, lo yasanu gadol, you can't give him instead a big house, and vice versa. Gadol lo yasanu katan. So the big house, you can't give him a smaller house. Echad, if there was one house on the property, lo yasenu shnayim. You can't give him back a property with two houses, or maybe one floor and two floors, whatever. One room and two rooms. Shnayim lo yasenu echad. If it was two houses, you can't give back one house. Lo yivchos min hachalonos, and you can't if you're rebuilding the house. It has to have the same number of windows. Lo yosef elayim. You can't have fewer windows or more windows. Elamidash shame, unless they both agree, obviously. So the Gemara says, "Hey Chidami, what are we talking about? If we're talking about a particular house, I'm renting you this house, Nafal Azale, then like if the house falls down, why is he responsible to replace the house? He rented them this house. This is the house. It was a defective house, as it turned out, or whatever. It fell down, but the terms of the rental were this house, and he doesn't have to replace it for him. Idi Amalei Bayis. And if he just said a house, right, then why can't you give him back more? Right? Why can't you give him a larger house or a house or more houses? Amar Reish Lakish, the Amar Reish Lakish says the case is Bayis shani maskir lach midas arko kach v'kach. If in the terms of the rental agreement says I'm renting you a 2,000 square foot house, then that's what you have to rent them, right? If you have to replace the house, you have to replace it with the same size. Can't be bigger, can't be smaller, unless they agree. Yeah, okay. Well, Kumar says that's still a mile member. Well, that's obvious, right? You have a contract. It says a 2,000 square foot house. It has to be a 2,000 square foot house. What do we need a Mishnah for that? Elakios or Ravin or Reish Lakish. Ravin comes along and says the name of Reish Lakish. The terms were Bais Kazeh Ani Maskirlach. He says, I'm going to rent you, like, let's say you have like a not a demo, but like when they're showing to show you a condo, right? They've got one that's the model, right? They're showing you the model, and so I'm going to rent you a house like this one, right? So therefore, then you still have then you would have to replace the house if it falls down, you have to replace it with a similar one. Because the land member says, what have you solved? That's obvious, right? What problem have you solved by saying that? So what is the model consist of? Let's say you offer waterfront property, right? So I might say, my kazeh dekaya guda nara. When you say I'm going to rent you a house like this one, and I show you a waterfront property, right? So I might have thought, what does like this one mean? Maybe it means like that it's on the water, it's on the beach, right? But not how the size. Maybe I'm not referring to the size. Maybe I give you a bigger one or a smaller, or at least I could give you a bigger one, right? As long as it's on the water. Kamash Malan. So Gemara tells us no. When I say like this one, it has to be like this one in all respects. So it has to be both beachfront and at least the same size. That's the end of the eighth parak of Bava Metzia, and now we will continue with the ninth parak. So here we're talking about sharecropping. And there's two terms. There's an aris, which is a sharecropper. In a sharecropping arrangement, you work the land, and you have to, as rent, you pay a percentage of the crop, right, of what the land produces. And then there's a chakira, which is tenant farming, which is you pay a set fee, right? It's nothing to do with the harvest. You pay X dollars a year in order to be able to use the land and raise your crops. So the Mishnah says, Makavril Sana Mechavero. You lease a field. Malcolm Shanago Liksar Yiksar. If the local custom is the farmer harvests the crops, then you have to harvest them. Lakor Yakar. If the custom is to uproot them, right, rather than just cut them, then that's what you have to do. Lachor Shachor Yakor. And if the custom is to plow after you finish harvesting, so that kind of prevents weeds from taking root, then you have to do that. Hakol Kamina Gamadina. Everything depends on the local custom. And now the same agreement that they have about the tefua. So if you're a sharecropper, you're paying whatever, a third of the produce you're paying as rent. So so also the straw that gets produced. So like maybe after you cut down the wheat, there's still stalks left, and you can use that as straw. That also you have to pay the percentage of that to the owner. And just as you divide the wine that you produce from a vineyard, same way you divide the vines and the whatever, the same thing as the wheat. The byproducts also you have to pay the percentage. And both of them have to provide the kanim, which are the reeds that support the vines, right? Like the trellis, right? They both have to share in providing that the infrastructure on the land. Okay, so the sharecropper basically is providing the labor, but he doesn't have to. He's not the one who has to. He gets to share the expenses of the infrastructure, like the trellis for the vines. Excuse me. So the Gemara says, Tana, we have a brisa. Makam shnago liktzar ein rashai lakor. So this brisa is basically the same as the Mishnah, but it's phrasing it in negative. If the custom is to cut the crops, then you can't uproot the crops. And lakor ein rashai liktzar, and vice versa. And either one can prevent the other from departing from local custom. So liktzar ein rashai lakor, if the custom is to harvest by cutting, then you can't uproot. Hi Amar Beina Detit Ban Liare, because one, I understand that, because one can say, I want, like I want you to uproot the crops, because then you have like this, mulch basically. It's good for the land. And the other one can say, Hi Amar Lo Matzina. And the other one says, it's too much work. Like I'm here to harvest wheat. I don't care about your land, right? About what's best for the land. So that's why you have to go by local custom. Now, lakor ein rashai liktzar, but what about the place where the custom is to uproot, and not then you can't force cutting it off. Because Haimar Bina the Tinakar, all right, one can say I want the land to be cleared. The owner can say I don't want these stumps growing in my being in my land. I want it cleared. Haimar Bina Tivna, and the other one can say no, I want the straw to the roots to stay there, the stumps to stay there because it's good for the animals to graze there. So therefore, since each one has a reason to want one way or the other, you just go by local custom. So, all right, so Gemara says, but why do you have to say either one can prevent the other from departing from local custom? Obviously, like, what are you teaching me there? Why are you saying that? So, Matam Kama. Gemara says, I'm saying, why we rule this way. It's not a new thing that each one of you can prevent the other from departing from local custom. I'm saying the reason that we have these rulings is because each one can demand local custom. Matam or why can't if the custom is to do one, you can't do the other? Because each one has a right, has a legitimate reason to prevent departure from local custom. Okay. Now, the next part of the Mishnah was Lachor Shachor Yachrosh. If the custom is to plow after harvesting, then you have to do that. Pshita, obviously. Lo tzricha ba'asra d'lo menachshe. We're talking about a place where people don't usually weed their fields while the crop is standing. But this guy actually, weeded it before harvesting. So you know why I weeded it before? Because I didn't want to plow afterwards. He should have made that an explicit condition, right? If you went ahead and weeded, we don't assume that you fulfilled the condition of the local custom. No, you have to keep doing local custom, even though you did not, unless you reached an agreement beforehand. Hakol Kamina Gamadina, the Mishnah said everything is by local custom. Hakol, I wouldn't mean everything. Everything usually means there are other cases which this applies to. What are the other cases? So you had Rabbanon. There's another local custom, right? If you have a wheat field, but there's also trees, right? So what's the local custom regarding who gets the benefit of the trees? Let's say they produce fruit, right? So it depends on the local custom. If it's a place where the custom is the trees are included in the deal, fine. And if the custom is they're not included, they're not included. So Gemara asks, Pshita. That's obvious. What are you telling me? Like, obviously, you go by the local custom. What we're talking about is there was a discount involved. Usually, sharecroppers pay a third. This guy, the owner says, you know what? I'm only going to take 25% from you. But he didn't say why. Maybe the guy can come and say, you know why I gave you a discount? I'm only charging you 25% because I wanted to keep the trees for myself, even though the local custom is that you get the trees, right? So Kamash Malon, so the Brisa tells us, no, maybe you're just being a nice guy, right? You're giving him a deal for less. If you don't say explicitly in the deal, I'm giving you a 25% deal, but I get to keep the trees. If you don't say that last part, then the 25% deal stands, and then we go by local custom for the trees. Now, then the Brisa said, if the trees are by custom not included, then they're not included. Pshita, that's obvious. Like, why do we need that case? That's the opposite case, where the going rate is 25%. And now I'm charging 33%, right? Why am I charging you more? You know why I'm charging you more? Or why I'm paying more. You know why I agreed to pay more, says the sharecropper? I assumed that you're giving me the trees, the benefit of the trees, which is not the local custom, so therefore I'm paying more. But if he didn't specify that, he had to make that explicit. If he didn't make it explicit, the fact that he's overpaying doesn't override local custom. Okay.
If both people were to agree to override the local custom, then it would be acceptable, right?
Yes, exactly. Right. And the Mishnah said that, right? The Mishnah said,
Yeah, I think so.
uh, uh, uh,
I think so. I'm not sure, but I think so.
no, the Brisa. The Brisa said, Ushnei Makrin says, okay, it's implied, it's implicit, but yeah, you're correct. If they agreed, then they agreed. Okay, Kishem Shecholkim B'Tfuah, Kach Cholkim B'Tevan U'Kash. The Mishnah said, just as you divide, you pay the percentage of the crop, you also pay the percentage of the byproduct. Amar Yosef, but Bavel Nehigu D'Lo Yehivetiv, no Larisa. In Bavel, the custom is you don't give the straw all belongs to the Balbais, to the owner, not the sharecropper. Why not? So, like, what's the difference? The Ika Inish the Yaiv. If there is somebody who does, generously give the straw to the sharecroppers, Ein Yafu, he's being generous for Lo Gamrina Minei. But by making the statement, this is the practice in Bavel, like, don't go by people who don't abide by that practice. There's no obligation to do that. The fact that some people depart from the practice doesn't change the general local practice. Don't try to bring a proof from that. Amar Rav Yosef, Buchra v'tafta v'arkavta. Rav Yosef says these are so when you kind of demarcate the border of a field, right? So they would kind of dig a ditch and pile up the dirt as a little ridge to demarcate the border, right? And these three terms, Buchra, Tafta, Varkavta, it's like the first try, the second try, and the third try. So I guess like the ridge gets flattened over time, and then you do it again. You do it a second time and pile up some more dirt, and then it gets flattened again, and you do it a third time. So there's a term for each one of these three. So all of these the work to do this, ve'kani de chizra, and also the basic fence, right? The poles, the stakes for a fence, the balbais. That has to be done by the owner, right? It's not the responsibility of the sharecropper. For chizra gufe, but the thorns, like you have, imagine a barbed wire fence, right? So you have the stakes in the ground, and then you stretch barbed wire between them, right? So the barbed wire, that is Dari. So that's the responsibility of the sharecropper, because I think the idea is that the basic demarcation of the border, that's all that anyone is required to do for their field. Now, if you want to keep out your neighbor's cows, right, because it's going to because they're going to graze in your wheat, then that is the responsibility of the sharecropper. So putting up the barbed wire or the thorns, that's the responsibility of the sharecropper. Klal de Mil. So what's the rule? Kol ikar balma de balbais. The basic uh, uh, guarding of the field is the responsibility of the owner. The tirusa yaserta, but any extra guarding, anything more substantial, darisa. That is the responsibility of the sharecropper.
But the Bava, he will benefit ultimately from the extra work that the sharecropper does. So shouldn't the sharecropper get some extra benefit from that, or no?
Well, I think the way it goes is when you're a sharecropper, you are responsible for the practice of how you raise the crops, right? The owner can't come and say, you could have raised more crops. That's not how it works with a sharecropper. You put in whatever effort you want to put in, right? And the third, or whatever the percentage is, you have to pay as rent, right? But
Uh,
the owner doesn't have the ability to say, you could have done a better job growing crops. You should have grown more crops. That's not how it works. So the same thing with the fence. It's like, look, I provided the basic infrastructure for fences, and it's up to you to maintain maintain that barrier, right? To keep out your neighbor's cows or whatever. V'yamar v'yosef, mara v'zivla, a hoe and a shovel, v'davla v'zarnuka, a bucket or a wine, a canteen, the balabais. That the owner has to provide the basic tools. Arisa avid be'yore. But if you want to talk about like irrigation ditches, that is so to do a better job, right? Obviously, an irrigation ditch will make it much easier to water the field. So the owner has to provide the basic necessities. If the sharecropper wants to put in better equipment, then that's on his nickel. So we said about vineyards, just as you have to pay a percentage of the wine, you also have to pay a percentage of the vines. Kani my vidatayo. So what are these? So Zamaros, I understand they're grapevines. Kani, what are these reeds? These like stakes in the ground? What is that doing in a vineyard? Amrei Dvei Rav Yanai. They said in the yeshiva of Rav Yanai, Kanim hamuchlakin. We're talking about peeled canes. Shebahen ma'amidin sagfanim. They're, like I said before, like a trellis that you prop up the vines so that they climb on them and they grow better. So once you've stopped using those, like once you've harvested and you don't need those anymore, who gets to keep them? So they split them according to the sharecropping agreement. Why does the Mishnah have to say they both have to share in providing them in the first place? Because like if one of them, so if only one of them provides the if only one of them provides the canes, then that person should get them at the end, right? So it should be obvious that if they're both, that this is where they're both sharing in the cost of the canes. Matam Kamar, so the Gemara says, the Mishnah is saying, and again, Matam, like why is this? Matam Shem Chalkim Kaim, why do they have to share the canes? Bishum Shem Mishapkim Kaim, because they both paid for them to go in the first place. Okay, we'll stop here for today and pick up with this next Mishnah tomorrow.
So, but why do they both have to share in the in the end? If they did both share in it, okay, then they can both receive the benefit. But why do both?
No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. They both they both get to keep a share in the canes, but that's because they both provided them in the first place. They both shared the cost of putting them in the first place.
Right, that I
Yeah?
understand, but why would they both responsible for the supplying them? Why did they both share in supplying them in the first place?
Oh, good question. So because that's considered so it should be one or the other, right? So I guess it's kind of a cross between basic infrastructure and the proper way to raise the grapes. Maybe it's a local custom thing, or maybe this is the general custom that if you do a sharecropping of a field, the custom is to share in the both the cost and the benefit of the canes, of the trellis. And we'll pick it up here tomorrow.
All right.
Have a good day, everybody.